Hello, welcome to our last Christmas lecture of the week. I have Dr. Sharon Colclough with me today, and we're going to be talking about the naughty and nice of gaming. Well, the moral questions behind the naughty and nice of gaming. So, Sharon, you want to give us a brief rundown of who you are?
Oh, well, it's in one of my slides, but that's
What's
okay.
spoiling?
Spoiler alert. No, it's fine. So I am a new transfer into the department. So my background is in film and media and screen studies.
Mhm.
And as I say in my lecture, one of the reasons I'm talking about the naughty and nice of game is because a lot of my writing takes place around things like representation and morality. So if you look me up, you'll see that I talk a lot about, is it all right to kill zombies? And should we be killing zombies? And what if we can cure the zombies? And how does that change how we kind of interact with that idea that they're sort of cannon fodder and it's okay to do that? So what really fascinates me in games is this idea that the bigger RPGs especially ask us to think quite carefully about the decisions that we make. And it starts to get quite interesting when we can make decisions about why we're doing things and the way that a game will encourage us on a pathway to do things in a certain way and take actions that we maybe wouldn't normally take. So that's kind of where my background is in terms of the research I do and why I'm kind of talking about this today.
That's really fascinating, Sharon. The Walking Dead has a whole bit of an arc about some of the characters believe that the zombies that they're just sick people and they're still people, even though they're undead, and it's very interesting, a very interesting way to kind of think about that. But without me rambling and going on about my theories and ideas, I'll let the expert take the stage and walk us through moral questions, the naughty and nice of gaming. So without further ado, Sharon, feel free to take us away.
Thank you so much. And there's my wonderful first slide. I'm really pleased that this is also my background. So thank you to Ben and thank you to Jamie that I've got this very lovely background here as well. So we're gonna dive in. I believe this is the last of the Christmas lectures, so I'm very honoured to be finishing out the Christmas lectures for my team. So yeah, we're going to look at the naughty and the nice of game. More importantly, sort of the moralities of gaming and a little bit about the psychology of us humans, how we relate to things, some of the reasons behind some of the decisions that we actually make, and the way that we sort of react to situations as well. So one of the really interesting things about game is the way it encourages us down sort of certain pathways and in certain directions and kind of funnels us towards taking actions that we maybe wouldn't normally do. So we're going to sort of think about how we decide to be good or how we decide to be bad and why that might actually be. So I've already said a little bit about myself, but heck, I'm going to say it again just for the fun of it. One of the things that I'm really, really interested in is representation and morality and death, actually, in game, TV, and film. So in screen studies, and the way that we use it, the way we approach it, the different ways that we interact with these areas within what are basically our entertainments. I'm not so interested in the educational aspect of screen studies in terms of educational games and these sorts of ideas where morality kind of takes a little bit of a different route. But I'm really interested in how we interact with narratives and situations, how we make decisions and kind of how we deal a little bit with the consequences of those decisions as well. So that's why we're looking at the naughty and the nice of gaming today. So I've got a couple of things just first off. I'll just talk about what we're going to look at in this talk, but I'll also say what I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions at the end because I am on one screen. So I don't have the facility to see the chat as it's going. So please don't be offended if I don't answer any questions while I'm talking. We'll do them at the end if anyone has anything that they want to talk about or say. So we're going to have a look at how we work as human beings. We're quite interesting creatures. We do quite a lot of putting on of our own feelings to inanimate objects, to animals, to other people. We do quite a lot of reasoning for the actions that we take. We We will give lots of circumstances that have pushed us in a certain direction and reasons for doing what we do. And I'm very, very interested in that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the naughty of gaming. So the ways that we undertake actions and maybe follow trajectories through narratives that maybe don't really align with social and cultural values, go against maybe what we would really do in the real world, but are fun nevertheless. So we're going to have a little look at that as well. And then the nice, so how games can sort of let us be kind, how we can make certain decisions to take the good path, or to perhaps, as I talk about later, kind of be the hero that we all sort of secretly possibly want to be very, very deep down inside, or even very, very surface based. We all want to be heroes and good people. So a couple of warnings. We are talking about the naughty of games. So I will be touching on some morally ambiguous or downright evil actions. That's not to say kind of don't watch along and kind of think about these. I'm not going into any of the really dark areas of gaming. That's a longer discussion and a longer lecture. But just so you're aware, so there's a little warning there. So I suppose as one of the things that I kind of want to just touch on, like, why am I using these quite glib terms of naughty and nice? Firstly, it's because, you know, games are not real, and we all understand that, we all get it, but we do all get very invested in games. We all get very kind of involved in the narrative. We get involved with characters. A good game, especially some of the RPGs and MMOs that I'm going to be talking about, they make us invested, they make us care, they make us align with characters in the game, whether they are the characters we're playing, or whether they are characters who move with us through the game, or are NPCs. This idea of empathy is something I'm going to talk about today, and the way that games make us feel empathy and make us kind of sometimes, you know, want to do the right thing and feel sadness when a character within a game dies. We get very invested, and that's why I'm kind of using these relatively glib terms. It's also that we will act unethically, we will act immorally in games. Some games encourage it, very, very much so. Give us higher points for doing things that we would actually never, ever, ever do in the real world. But again, you know, we can use these relatively glib terms when we're talking about these things. But also the naughty and nice goes very, very well with the idea of a Christmas lecture. If we're thinking about kids and the Christmas list, we want to know who's been naughty and who's been nice. So we're in the naughty and nice of gaming. Now, I was asked to do this, spoiler alert, because I talk about a couple of games in this talk that I don't play personally. A couple of my very lovely colleagues have kind of given me some information about a couple of these games. So spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil Attack on Titan, possibly. So perhaps put fingers in ears, close eyes, and sing your favorite winter song while I talk about that. There are potential spoiler warnings for Baldur's Gate 3 as well, but that depends on what I talk about. So there's nothing really to spoil it, because Baldur's Gate has so many pathways through it. There are so many decisions that we can actually take. That I would imagine I might spoil something a little bit for somebody, but that doesn't mean that there's not another pathway open to you. The other thing I just want to say is I am not in any way saying that games are bad. I'm not saying that you're a bad person if you choose slightly moral or immoral decisions within a game. I also don't think games bring out the violent side of us. A lot of research has been done into that, and absolutely kind of disproved a lot of the moral panics that go around new media and new ways of engaging with media. And game at the moment is at the forefront of that. when we finally get into my perfect world of the holosuite, I'm sure that there will be moral panics about the way that we use the next steps in technology, the next steps of virtual reality, the next steps of hyper reality. So in no way do I say any of this is bad. If you enjoy going through a game and taking that kind of route where you pretty much kill everything and enjoy it, brilliant. If you don't and you go through the kind of route, fabulous for you. Just wanted to be really clear about that, because I am talking a little bit about morality within this. So let's get into it. Okay, so first off, essentially why we're talking about naughty and nice. I've kind of gone into that a little bit, but some of the things that I'm really, really kind of interested in is the way that narratives and the choices, the optionality within games, offer us pathways. They also, with the more complex games, they offer us optionality to make decisions that really importantly have consequences. So if I think about sort of playing through something like Resident Evil, essentially, as far as I see it, as someone who is kind of just blowing off a bit of steam in a game, I am interested in clearing my path through the game to undertake the small quests that I need to undertake. I don't think about who I'm killing. They're zombies. They're trying to kill me. Therefore, I go forwards. And really, in the parts I've played, there is no real consequence, except if I run out of ammo or if I fail to kill a very, very big combatant. So the idea of having choices, but choices that have impact on me moving forward, is something that's really, really interesting to me. So we all know that games, video games in this case, and you know, things like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, do allow us to act in ways and undertake actions that we wouldn't do in the real world, that most of us would not really do in the real world. So I think that's sort of one of the things that I'm really interested in. The other thing is that games can steer us, or indeed force us to do things that we wouldn't necessarily want to do. And it does this in a myriad of different ways. And we'll talk about some of those in the naughty section. That sounds awful, doesn't it? Of this lecture or this talk. Thinking about the way that games can both sort of encourage us to do things in a moment, that when we kind of step out of the game, we will have a moment and think, gosh, did I really do that? Made total sense in the game, but now I'm thinking about it, maybe that wasn't something that I would really feel comfortable with doing. These sorts of questions are really interesting to me. And I think that when we're crafting narratives and when we're crafting really interesting approaches to these narratives, that these questions are very, very central, and they're very important, because what they're doing is they're engaging the player, they're engaging us. They're making us feel a part of the story, like our decisions have consequences, but also therefore value. And it allows us to play through a game in a manner that we want to, and in a way that we want to play or role play. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of psychology, because I think it's really important to sort of just think about how we behave. I'm going to touch on a couple of different experiments that were done, actually both in the 1960s. But they give us a little bit of insight into how we kind of work as humans. This isn't to say that these are good experiments, that we should all go and try and recreate them. But it's interesting that we can start looking at the way we kind of react and behave in certain situations. Now, a lot of the stuff that we do is based around culture and society. It's based on our upbringing. It's based on the rules that we're given as we grow up. And it's based on sort of socially accepted or culturally accepted approaches to situations, relationships, etc. So, in a very, very broad way, we show respect to people who are older than us, because if your parents were anything like mine, that was drummed into me. That was something that I did. You show respect to your elders. You position someone who is maybe your lecturer in a position of authority, because the social agreement is that they, for the subject that you're studying, know more than you and can impart their knowledge to you. So there's a social agreement there. So what I mean by that is that there are certain situations where we put our social understanding of a situation or environment, and we act in very specific ways because of what we've learned and what's acceptable. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these two experiments. The first is called the Stanford Prison Experiment, only called the Stanford Prison Experiment because it was done at Stanford University. I'm also going to look at something called the shock experiment. Stanley Milgram was the guy behind this experiment, and it's both examples of the way in which situations and circumstances can affect the way we behave, even if it goes against how we would want to behave. I hope that makes sense. I'll explain a little bit more as I go through. So, the Stanford Prison Experiment. The main concept of this is how positioning and power dynamics play out. And what do I mean by this? There are a set of students who were all in this experiment, and they were asked to role play the idea that they were in a prison. Some of these students were guards, some were prisoners. And what happened was that all of the participants, whether they were guards or whether they were prisoners, started really acting in very stereotypical ways in each of these roles. So the guards became really quite punitive. They started really pushing the prisoners. You can see we have a prisoner there, in inverted commas, a prisoner, with a bag over the head. They started physically threatening the people who were seen as the prisoners within the situation. In turn, what the prisoners did was they became very, very susceptible to instruction. They took on the role of someone who has no power. They became very much at the whim of those people who were the prison guards. Now, it's important to remember that this was just an experiment. Everyone knew that this was an experiment. Everyone knew that they were equals in terms of the fact that they were all students in this experiment. And yet, we had very, very specific behaviours that came out within the situation. And what this proves or indicates to us is that situational forces can overwhelm the disposition of a person or a participant in this case. Now, what does that mean? Well, the social rules and theoretical expectations, there are a group of people in power, there are a group of people who are powerless. These two groups begin behaving in certain ways and doing things that, if we were not in this situation, would probably not be ways in which they would normally act. Now, I can hear you. Why on earth are you talking about that, Sharon? Well, I propose that we can look at game as a bit of a situational force, especially some of the games I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about a game called Foxhole, which is a game that very much puts you into a partisan role. It puts you on one side or another. There is a group dynamic to it. You have a role to play. And there are situational forces that encourage you to perhaps act in ways that you normally wouldn't. So what do I mean by that? Well, the game puts you in positions and situations, narrative placement or historical placement, where you are expected or need to act in a certain way. And what that means is that the behaviours that you display, what your character does, the decisions you make, fit into the situation that you're presented with. So we act in the heat of the moment. The actions we undertake that we maybe wouldn't normally do or would concern us or worry us when we take a step back and think about them become for the game. They become for the situation of the game. They become as a part of the role that we're playing in the game. And that's why I wanted to talk about the prison experiment. So let's look at the shock experiment. So this is the Stanley Milgram shock experiment. So again, in a way, this sort of focuses on the idea of authority. Again, cultural and social learning. People have authority and we are obedient to it. And this idea of the shock experiment, and I'll explain what happened in it in a second, relates very strongly to the idea that Milgram believed that there was a conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. So, in other words, again, we will act in ways that go against how we personally feel because we're being obedient to a higher authority or a higher power. So, what happened in this experiment? There's a little image from the experiment. So, participants were always put in the role of the teacher. The person in the role of the student was always someone who was from Milgram's team. In other words, a sort of an actor. What the teacher was asked to do by the experimenter, the person in control, a position of authority, was they were asked to administer shocks, electrical shocks, to the student every time the student got an answer wrong. Now, let me just clarify. These are adults. We are dealing with university students. We're not electrically shocking children in any way, shape, or form. The other thing to be very clear about is that there were no electric shocks. But as far as the teacher was concerned, everything they were doing was real. So as they increased the shock and the perceived pain that was associated with that shock, they believed that to be real. The student was never electrically shocked. They reacted as if they were. The interesting thing is that because the learner is being taught using electrical shocks, the teacher can see the impact of that upon the student. They can see pain, they can see fear, and yet they were always willing to increase the electrical shock based on the instructions of the experimenter. So gosh, what does that tell us? Why am I saying this is relevant to game? I propose that the game has the authority. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean that the game is making you hurt people, but we're guided to act in certain ways in a game. Usually it's with the kind of the reward of progression through a game, or it's the reward of materials that are needed to progress through a game. It might mean, with that in mind, if we think of the game as the authority figure in that relationship, that we're going to be open to acting in ways that we wouldn't do in real life. They might go against our morals. They might go against how we wish to be seen in the world. But what we can also do is get very easily caught up in the gameplay. And then the actions become for the game. Yet again, the game has the authority if we want to move through the game. And there are games where we can choose different routes. We don't always have to obey the game. But in many situations, to progress, we need to undertake certain actions that will move us forward. The game has the authority. The game sets the boundaries and the rules. Our behaviours as the character are sometimes very, very clearly set, other times a little more ambiguous. But it propels us forward if we act in certain ways. So that takes us to the moral choices that we make in game. Now, again, going to say, I'm not saying that if we make what we could deem immoral choices in a game, that we're bad people. Absolutely not. It's just interesting because sometimes we make decisions in a game where when we stop playing the game, we take a step back and we have a think about the game, we're a little bit shocked at what we did. And that's what I'm interested in. So the first thing to say is that everyone's morals are different. Morals are, I saw a kind of a kid explain morals. Morals are what we do when no one's looking. So it's doing the right thing when no one is telling you what to do. But we all have different morals. We all have different ideas of what is right and wrong. There are generalized ones that we can all pretty much agree on. These are social and cultural in their creation. And as people, we do have a very kind of strong morality, a strong moral center. The morals that I'm talking about are kind of that set of principles, those guiding behaviors. They can be yours as the player, but they can also be the characters as well. So in a good few RPGs, there is a kind of a moral code within those games. Characters will have certain attributes, they will have certain expectations placed upon them, and you'll kind of be expected to act in a certain way. So why is this interesting? Well, I think it's really interesting. So one of the wonderful things about game is that we are essentially in a consequence-free environment. So we can do what we want within a game, within respect of moving through a game. Obviously, if it's a very kind of clear set of options that you have, I'm going to talk about Dungeons of Dreadlock in a minute. Pretty much to get through that game, you have to just do what you need to do to get through the game. There really aren't any choices. Consequences, in essence, are that your character dies and you're respawned. But essentially, what I mean by consequence-free environment is that anything we do really in a game doesn't essentially hurt or injure anyone. Now, there are different approaches to the way people play games, but I'm talking about just kind of you playing through a game. Okay. But it's the complexity and it's the player interaction and immersion, which means that we have what are called shades of grey in our game narrative. So in other words, there are consequences to our actions. We are encouraged to think about the decisions we make, especially because they may come into play later on in the game and affect the narrative that goes forwards from there. So there's a couple of quotes on screen. They're both from the same place. So one of the things is that to have kind of a positive player experience, we need tangible consequences for the actions of decision making that come out in a game. On another hand, we are clear that we need meaningfulness within our choices, and also the feeling of having that choice make some sort of impact. Now, in basic terms, that second quote, kind of those things are a little bit against each other. But I think if you're looking at something where those choices are central to the way that you're playing, they're very important. It must feel that what you do has impact and meaning within the game. So optionality, behaving positively or negatively, morally, immorally, good, bad, naughty, nice, become key to engaging the player and having you move through the game in a meaningful way. So then what that discussion comes down to is the nuances in the decision making, that shades of grey that we touched on earlier. The idea that those differences in decision, the effects that they have of the actions we take, have meaning because they play forwards within the game. But also that it isn't an easy decision always to make. There isn't a clear right or wrong. There are options between those two things, and we have to navigate what the consequences of those are. So games do push us into directions. It's one of the tangible things that we can say about games. We are guided through games in lots and lots of different ways. Lighting, lines of sight, the way in which things are presented within a scene, all guide us through and push us into directions within a game. In terms of the game that's on the screen at the moment, little screen grab. This is from a game called Dungeons of Dreadlock. I picked it because it's a very simple game. In as much as it's a puzzler, it's a different kind of levels. Sometimes you go back between the levels, but it's at heart a puzzler. To move forwards, you have to kill stuff. There is no choice. This is what we do. There are no essential kind of moral quandaries in this, because to move forward through the game, that's what you need to do. Death comes very easily when you actually undertake it in the game. There isn't particularly a visual or kind of auditory kind of consequence that hits home that this character that you have attacked has kind of feelings or is kind of that integral kind of narrative part of the game. So in terms of a very basic kind of easy sort of game, the game pushes us in the direction of always moving forwards. We have to always solve the puzzle. Sometimes we have to kill the Minotaur with the spiky things that come through the floor, but it's about learning how to utilize the elements within the game. Very, very basic stuff. It encourages, through its design, it encourages progression. It encourages us to always move forwards. We undertake the actions and the game punishes or rewards us. In this case, it punishes us by killing us or rewards us by allowing us to get through or find another skill or find some small element that will help us in the next challenge. Okay, but games move us forwards. It pushes us in a direction. So what that brings us to is narrative engagement. So the storytelling that starts to become very, very integral to the way in which we're asked to make decisions in those more complex games where there are consequences to our actions. So we're asked to begin to feel empathy, have a decision about the characters that we meet. We're asked to like or dislike. When things happen to characters, sometimes we are meant to feel sad, but we are meant to feel perhaps empathy. It might be happiness or joy, depending on the type of character that has been presented to us. The ways in which we interact, the fact that our actions have consequences, means that we are more immersed and invested in the narrative and in our actions within that narrative. So with a more complex game like an RPG, we have this idea that our decisions affect the play, they affect us moving forward, and then affect the decisions and the pathways that are open to us as we progress through the game. That brings me to something that kind of pops up within the directionality of games. So in many cases, not all, but in many, we're offered this kind of concept of the monstrous other. So the other, it essentially kind of comes from literature and film originally, but can absolutely be placed into game very, very, very easily. The other or the othering of people or creatures kind of comes down to the idea of the presentation of a character or creature that is different to the protagonist. Through that difference, the assumption is that they are less than and therefore expendable. We could talk about this in a myriad of ways, but just focusing on this idea of othering something or someone that is different. So this happens with literal monsters. If we look to let's look to Resident Evil again. I have no qualms killing the villagers. They are zombies and they are trying to kill me. They are othered. They are not me. I am still in control of my faculties as a character. They are not. They are trying to kill me, therefore. So it can also happen in things like Monster Hunter, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a minute. You are literally told that these creatures are monsters. The association we have with monsters is that they are a threat to us as humans. Therefore, we are perfectly within our moral rights to attack and kill them. So that idea of difference, of othering, is quite key in a lot of games. Having some sort of moral reasoning for the actions we take, they are X, I am Y, therefore, is very, very important. And it kind of links to concepts of partisanship within games, but it also links to kind of the way in which we will give ourselves reasons for the things that we do. So I'm going to talk about Foxhole as a starter. And it's a really interesting one because it takes us into that idea of partisanship. There is a patrician pathway within the game as well, which means that you can, if you wish, not actually particularly engage in some of the more violent elements of the game. You kind of support those elements rather than directly engage in them. But one of the things that I'm really, really interested in within Foxhole, and I was made aware of this by a couple of my colleagues who very kindly kind of explained how they've played the game and kind of some of the effects that it's had on them, is that because of the sort of the positioning of you in the game, you are on one side or the other. So already we're getting that idea of othering. Now, although we are dealing with humans on either side, we do have the idea that one group of people's actions are correct and one group of people's actions are incorrect. And that all depends on whether you're on the colonial side or the warden side. In other words, whichever side you're on, your actions have meaning and they have reasoning. The other side's actions do not, because you are at war with them. There's a pseudo nationalism within the game, which has basically sprung up kind of within the game. There are derogatory terms for each of the people on different sides. This is really interesting because, again, it fits into that othering. Therefore, it's okay to kill the other person who's on the opposite side to you. There's also quite a lot of moral certitude within the game. This idea that it is okay to take actions because you are doing them for the team or the side that you're playing on. There are a number of opportunities, shall we say, within the game to act in what would be genuinely seen as very immoral ways. Killing civilians, choosing to kill civilians, attacking medical facilities. All things that in the arena of war and through the rules of warfare are looked upon as not acceptable. But I would sort of put forwards the stuff that we've talked about in relation to the Milgram experiment, but also the prison experiment. That idea of the game has authority. You are within a group of people. You are acting with a group of people for their benefit and working with them. It is a community game. It is one where your actions have consequences for the other people on your team. Within the situations that are presented to you, your actions have reasoning, and that's really important. When you take a step back, possibly from your actions, you may have regrets. You may wonder why you did the thing that you did. But in the heat of battle, in the heat of the game, your actions have reasoning. And I find that really interesting. Monster Hunter. Okay. Before anyone says anything, I know you hunt monsters. It's there on the box. Yeah, but there are moral choices and ideas of necessity which are played out within the game. Thinking about how the game directs you to certain actions, but also has these kind of moral questionable moments. I've got the Kulu Yaku on the screen. A creature, let's not call it a monster because that's othering, that's giving you license to kill this creature. A creature that uses tools, a creature that tries to defend itself while it's being killed by trying to use a tool, offering us the idea of intelligence there. A creature that doesn't attack us until it's pushed to and it defends itself. These are all really interesting things to me. This idea that there is an allowability to attack monsters in the game Monster Hunter, that in some cases the monster isn't attacking us. We just need to kill it because that's what we've been asked to do by the game, or that's a very fast way to get resources to make us progress through the game. So I've read quite a lot about Monster Hunter, and quite a lot of people express regret at their actions within the game, express remorse, see intelligence within the creatures that they're attacking, and again have qualms about what the game is asking them to do. On the other hand, people rightly say, but it's a game and it's on the box, you're a monster hunter. Not condemning any pathway through this game, but it's just really interesting that the game is making us do things that we might not feel completely at ease with. Baldur's Gate. Okay. You can, if you wish, run an evil campaign through Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate is a really interesting game because it offers lots and lots of optionality. In the very first section of Baldur's Gate 3, I've lost count of the number of routes through the first quandary or the first part of the narrative. You can negotiate, you can attack, you can bring people on as your allies, you can decide not to participate at all. There are so many choices that you begin to understand that the decisions you make do then have consequences as you play the game. Now, interestingly, in Baldur's Gate, if you run an evil campaign, a naughty campaign, you will be chastised by other characters within the game. They will tell you off. They will try to bring you back to the path of good. They may even leave your group. So you have initial consequences for acting in a naughty way within the game by losing compatriots along the way. But you can still continue on that path of evil. Obviously, there are levels of evil, like shades of grey. There are levels of things that you can choose to do. That might be helping the villain. It might be romancing the villain. It may also be things like killing innocents. That idea that there are actions and consequences are really quite central to something like this game. But then why run an evil campaign? One of the reasons is that you get to see the narrative from a different perspective. It might even just be fun being the villain of the piece, being the person who screws things up for other characters. It also makes an ending that is different, and it makes your second playthrough kind of a bonus. You also get to, in a like a psychological way, maybe explore your reactions to your decisions as a player. Or taking the evil route, making those decisions that are morally questionable, is an interesting experiment. The important thing with Baldur's Gate is that you're not particularly forced into any of these pathways. They are part of your decision making. The optionality that you get given affects your way through the game. It affects how your character is perceived and then what you can then do in the game and how it ends up. Pikmin. We're still in the naughty of game. And by naughty, I just mean that we're doing things where we've been encouraged to grow empathy for characters. We are encouraged to see them as elements that are important to us. And then we are asked to kind of sacrifice or do things with them that we may kind of feel uncomfortable with. So Pikmin is a really nice example. So little creatures, Pikmin, are basically followers. They follow you, the player, through the game. You harness your forces to fight your way through a garden. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Pikmin is something called the cinema of attractions. Now, humans are very strange creatures. We like really, really cute stuff, and we like really, really kind of ew stuff as well. A good example of the ew is the very strange kind of popularity of caught on camera shows, people falling over on ice and everyone laughing. So that's sort of the ooh bit. The cute bit, cat videos. Everyone loves a cat video. We like cute. We're attracted to these two things, cute stuff and kind of grisly stuff. So Pikmin are cute. Okay, they've got big eyes. So big eyes are associated with cute things. Kittens, puppies, babies. Not so much babies for me, but cute things. Big eyes, kind of innocence and kind of vulnerability. This idea that we have guardianship of these creatures, we feel responsibility for them, and we send them to die horribly in battle. We hear their little screams as they die. We feel potentially bad for doing that. And that's really interesting. Again, the game is asking us or encouraging us to act in a certain way. It's pushing us into some sort of decision-making process that means we feel we need to sacrifice these creatures to progress through the game. Spoiler, Attack on Titan. So if you're not familiar with Attack on Titan, Titans, which is what you can see in the background of that image, are changed subjects of Ymir. They are forcibly changed people. So they are the same as the person in the foreground, but they've been experimented on and they've been changed. As one of my colleagues pointed out, the subjects of Ymir are very, very repressed people. And yet, in the game, we are encouraged as the player to kill the Titans, who are essentially forcibly othered members of your community. Now, it's a little bit the same as the zombie stuff that I was talking about before. I'm not saying we can cure our Titans, but they were people once. And if we start thinking in that way, it kind of raises really interesting questions for us about the validity of the choices that we make. However, as my colleague also pointed out to me, killing them in interesting ways means you get a high score. The game encourages me then to kill these Titans, these forcibly othered, repressed people, in interesting ways so that I can score high points within the game. Kind of a morally ambiguous game, to say the least. So we're into the good now. So Megan Starks, who's a senior narrative designer at Obsidian Entertainment, talks about the idea that 97% of players prefer to align with the good path over the evil one. So maybe we all do secretly want to be good people at heart. Griffin talks about the idea that she hopes they will be the hero that she wants to think she could be within a game. She wants to save worlds without violence. She wants to utilize curiosity and be helpful within games. Now, you know, that doesn't mean that we can't play games with guns or swords. I love playing games with guns. Deep into Dead Space at the moment. I have no qualms about killing the creatures in Dead Space, regardless of the fact that they were once crew members. But it's really interesting that some people do want to play games through, and popular games that do have violence in them, but with a less violent kind of trajectory through those games. So what do we actually mean by being good? Considering the ability of another character in a situation. So thinking about whether it is essential to harm or kill them within the game. Sometimes we do stuff because we're not really thinking. And again, it's a game, completely know that. But it's interesting because we may have moral quandaries, we may have regrets about some of the actions we take in a game, but also weighing out the narrative possibilities or consequences of things we do in a game is really interesting. Okay. So just as an example, many RPGs have a morality system, so good deeds become rewarded, and that's really quite interesting. In Pigman, you can try for a 0 death run. So you can try to not lose one single little Pikmin, and it can be done. It's really hard, but it can be done. Mass Effect has a morality system which affects how the NPCs see your character in the game. And it's interesting, the effect that having negative feedback, even from NPCs, can have upon a player. You can start to feel judged. And it's interesting that your actions are judged within a game like Mass Effect. So I suppose what we're looking at are games where empathy becomes a central aspect of the work. I've just used one example. So Spiritfarer is a game where you basically have to find out how to assist spirits into their afterlife. So it could be righting a wrong. It could be building them a house. Whatever it might be, it's up to you to kind of find what it is you need to do, what act of kindness or goodness you need to do to assist them on their way. So we can be good in games. We can also choose pathways through games that mean we don't always kind of take the negative route or the easy route. Sometimes we take the hard route and we find a different reward within that. So first off, we don't all have to be good in video games by any means. I just think it offers us some really interesting questions. So just so you know, I love killing stuff in Dead Space. I love my little bloody footsteps after I have killed someone in Dungeons of Dreadlock. It is just interesting when you think about how much games try to make you care and what they're asking you to do in terms of your empathy and sympathy towards characters, how they try to get you to know them and feel something for them. It's also about that idea of dealing with the consequences of some of your actions. Sometimes when we're really deeply involved in a game, we can be a little bit surprised by how deeply we maybe feel the consequences of our actions, especially when we're acceding to the authority of a game and kind of doing what the game wants us to do. It is really fun. So it's really fun to be naughty in games. It's also fun to be good. It depends how you're feeling on the day. It is a big part of games, the idea of being able to do something that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So this is my little thing. So kill your zombies, kill your orcs, kill all the things you need to kill in your game to make you have fun and to progress and do the things that you want to do in the game. But maybe try and save the Pikmin. Maybe try and save the Coolier car. And maybe, just maybe, try and save the Owlbear Cub just once in a while. And lastly, have a little think sometimes, because it's interesting, about what the game is actually asking you to do. That's my lecture. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know how many people I lost during my little discussion of morality, but hopefully it was vaguely enjoyable and I didn't spoil things too much.
You actually gained viewers, actually, as the talk went on. So we do have a few questions.
Cool.
Nope, not using a real name has asked quite a few, so we'll make our way down from the top. He asks, introducing faceless GTA NPCs to the front bumper, no emotional response. Showing the protagonist mercy kill a favored NPC and making the player push a button more so? Question mark.
I think it depends on you, but what the game is very much doing, and we can look at something like Last of Us as a nice example of this. And actually, they don't even make the player push the button for the big death in The Last of Us, but we've played that character, we know the character, and we feel something when that character is taken from us, even though we don't have to do it. So I think making the player push the button, that's one of the really interesting questions as a part of this. How do you feel that the game is then making you do that? So not good, not bad, just really, really interesting.
And then a follow-up question is talking about The Other here. So they asked, an interesting subversion of The Other is seeing the racism in Mass Effect and a few more human supremacist characters when you roll up with alien squad mates.
It's not really a question, but absolutely. So othering can take place across a lot of different things. If you are with your squad, they are you, they're with you, they're your team. The othering could take place in a lot of different ways, and it's a very wide thing. So you can talk about things like the monstrous feminine, you can talk about things like racism within the othering, and it's one of those things that has its roots in a lot of the very, very bad things that have happened in history. It's a lot of the reasoning behind some of the extremely awful actions that humanity has taken. And it's just interesting that these little things, and I think you've talked to me a little bit about it, Ben, in Foxhole.
Yeah.
There's the partisanship. There's this idea that you're on one side, someone else is on another, and it others the other team, even though we're in a World War II scenario and everyone is human.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, it's a really interesting observation.
Yeah, I have found myself like instantly othering the colonials. We call them collies, and it's like it's just straight away. There's that not real derogative term for another faction. So it's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Nope, not using a real name actually
Mhm.
doesn't agree with your Pikmin. I'm curious to see how we can
Fair enough.
what your thoughts on this is. He says there are high of working towards the betterment of the group, like Olimar feeding them to feeding them and growing their numbers, and possibly teaching them. Yeah.
I think, well, you have guardianship of them, do you not? You look after them, and what it's encouraging, I think, what it's encouraging you to do is care for them.
Hmm.
It's the same with anything that we kind of associate with or put our care and love and attention into. And how no one will remember Tamagotchis, but
Oh, I remember Tamagotchi. Yeah,
how bad
yeah.
did you feel when you forgot to feed your Tamagotchi? You have guardianship. It's some pixels on a screen, but you have guardianship of this thing. And
Mhm.
what is just really interesting is that some people who play Pikmin feel bad about the decisions they have to make to progress through the game, or feel they have to make to progress through the game. As I
Mhm.
said at the start, there's no right and there's no wrong in this. It's
Mhm,
a
yeah.
game and it's not real.
Yeah, everyone partakes in a game differently. Like
Very much so.
and that I think offers that unique way of engaging with it, which is interesting because your take on how you experience Pikmin and how Nope has experienced it is different. So that's very interesting.
There's very different like approaches. If you read about like Monster Hunter, some people get very angry that some people worry about killing the creature
Yeah,
in Monster Hunter, and that's fine. That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
People get very kind of like aggressive because it's like it's Monster Hunter. What do you think you're supposed to do? But it's just interesting again because there are moral moments within the
Hmm.
game where what you're doing maybe doesn't feel quite fair. Perhaps
Hmm.
that's a better word, you know. And we could take that out into the real world. I mean, the cooler car kind of looks like a dodo, and we
Yeah.
kind of know what happened to the dodo. It's just an interesting little kind of moment that you can go, oh,
Hmm. So again, Nope is was just rolling through the questions today. He mentions that astounded that you didn't bring up Undertale and didn't make the list of making moral choices and trying to make you care.
I had an hour.
Um, had an hour, yeah.
I mean,
um,
I didn't go for Sims. I didn't go for the walling up the
yeah,
sim and starving them to death in the cellar or drowning them. Just because I had an hour and I just thought I'd
yeah.
pick some different games.
David White says that Moss is a great example of a VR game which aims to build the bond between the player and the mouse that you're controlling. That's interesting.
Doesn't feel like I could play that game. Does the mouse die? I have to look up if the dog dies in a film. I can't take it.
The
I
poor,
know
poor
it's not
dogs.
real, but I can't take it.
Jamie asks, are there any games you've been worried any games that you've been worried by their use of othering and negative uses for othering?
Me personally, no, but I have a sort of I'm very picky about the games that I choose to play. So I go for spoilers. I want to know what the game's about. I don't choose games where I think I'm not going to enjoy the trajectory through it or whatever that might be. I'm sure there are games out there though where the othering, you know, depending on who's playing and depending on what their background is and what their experiences are, could be troubling and worrying. I'd be interested to know what games people feel that about,
Hmm.
because that ties in really strongly to kind of representation. The idea of just general slurs and things being used in games, again, that's othering and that's concerning just on a very basic sort of human level. But
Human level, yeah.
not for me in terms of the games I've played, but I'm sure that many people have gone into a game and something's happened and it doesn't feel good or
Hmm.
right. Yeah.
Well, that's very, very interesting. It's been awesome to kind of see this take on I think a lot of modern gamers are, myself included, a little bit desensitized to, because we've grown up playing violent games, and I think it almost desensitizes the what's actually happening. If you, I think Metal Gear Solid 2 said it really well, was, turning war into a video game, and it almost takes away the reality of what you're doing. And yeah, it's all fun and games. It's not real, and and,
It isn't real.
and we understand that it's not real.
Mm.
And I think that that's the nope, laughing at the war crimes we do in 40k tabletop role playing games, but it's because it's not real.
It isn't real, but it's very interesting that what games are, especially now as game engines become more developed, and
Mm-hmm.
you're able to play online, so you're not even kind of confined by the storage that you have accessible, is the games are getting bigger. Games are affording you more optionality and asking you to become even more invested in them. So at a certain point, like, I felt bad selling my car. Like, I gave it feelings. I felt that it was gonna miss me,
You had
right?
attachment, yeah.
So why would that be different, that we're investing all this time and energy into a
Mm-hmm.
character in a game? We're potentially gonna be asked to then sacrifice maybe within that game,
Yeah,
or
exactly, yeah.
as the first question, pull the trigger on that. That it's I've had students tell me that they've been crying at certain points of the game when they've been asked to actually do that. I just
Yeah.
think, yes, we know it's not real, but that doesn't stop us crying or feeling
Yeah,
emotion at a film or music or a game. And it's just
exactly.
that possibility of getting
Mhm.
really invested.
It's that
And then what
attachment.
does that mean, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Sharon. That's been
No
very
worries.
interesting, and thank you for everyone that's partaked in asking questions and partaking in the Christmas lectures. This is our final talk of the week, so we've had a long week worth of Christmas talks of wide and interesting topics. If you've missed any of them this week, they are all on the YouTube channel, so you can go back, and that YouTube channel is the Staff's Games Development on YouTube, which is here. So if you want to go find any of the previous lectures, they're all available here for you to watch. I do believe they are going to go through some editing, and we are, I think, going to re-upload them with them edited and trimmed down, so we can make them a bit more concise in places. So if that does happen, just keep a keen eye out for them. I hope everyone has a wonderful Christmas break and happy holidays if you don't celebrate Christmas. And we will see you all in the new year. So again, Sharon, thank you very much for giving up the time and putting this talk together. And again, thank you to our viewers for taking time to partake in our talks. And with that, we'll say goodbye.